In the frigid December of 1773, a strange silence fell over Boston Harbor. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. This wasn't a natural storm, but a man-made tempest of defiance that would shatter an empire. Tonight, a group of shadowy figures disguised as Native Americans will ignite a rebellion that echoes through history. But to truly understand their act, we must first go back and listen to the whispers that grew into a roar. The story of the Boston Tea Party is not just about tea, it's about control. For decades, the American colonies had been little more than a cash cow for Great Britain. Under a ruthless economic policy known as mercantilism, the colonies were forced to trade almost exclusively with the mother country. They were a captive market, and every penny they earned was destined to enrich the crown. This created a profound sense of resentment, but it was just the beginning. In fact, protest articles appeared even in local newspapers like the Massachusetts and Boston Weekly. The British Parliament, seeing the colonies as a resource to be exploited, began passing a series of tax acts. The Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts were just two of the earliest chains forged to bind the colonists. The new weapon the Crown used to tighten its economic chains was the Tea Act of 1773. But this was no ordinary tax. This was a masterstroke of political maneuvering designed to save the bankrupt British East India Company. By giving the company a monopoly to sell its tea directly to the colonies, Britain could undercut local American merchants and smugglers. To colonial leaders, this wasn't just an unfair economic policy. It was a sinister conspiracy to undermine their very freedom. The true purpose of this law was to break the monopoly of American merchants and destroy the legislative power of the colonies. To them, the price of tea was irrelevant. What truly mattered was the principle. The battle cry that had been simmering for years now became a fiery declaration. No taxation without representation. It was at the peak of this tension that a secret organization known as the Sons of Liberty rose to prominence. This group, made up of local merchants, artisans, and radical politicians, had sworn to protect American rights. For them, this was a moment of truth, complete resistance or a surrender to the Crown. In public assemblies across Boston, calls to reject the Tea Act grew louder. Each day, the 3 ships docked in the harbor became a symbol that had to be sent back to Britain. On December 16, 1773, thousands of people crowded into Boston's Old South Meeting House. The goal was simple: decide the fate of the tea on the ships. After hours of debate, it was decided the ships and their cargo would be sent back to Britain. But when Governor Hutchinson refused to let the ships leave customs, a tense murmur filled the room. Only 2 words were said: "This meeting can do nothing more." This was the signal. It was time for action. As night fell, about 100 men disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. This symbolic act was a declaration that they were no longer British, but free Americans of this land. Armed not with weapons, but with hatchets and determination, they marched toward the ships in the harbor. The air was cold, and the tension was palpable. They climbed aboard the ships in silence. Their purpose was clear: to dump the tea into the harbor. But this was not an act of vandalism. It was a protest. The participants were determined not to damage the ship or any other goods, focusing solely on the tea. For approximately 3 hours, 342 chests of tea were hurled into the waters of Boston Harbor. The air filled with the strong scent of tea leaves. It was the smell of defiance, a smell Boston would remember for decades. Hundreds of people watched the event from the shore in silence. What remained were millions of dollars worth of tea floating on the salty water, and the brave spirit of rebellion. When the British government in London heard of this act, they were furious. It was the biggest defiance against the Crown's authority yet. In retaliation, they passed the coercive acts, known in America as the Intolerable Acts, taking the harshest measures to quell the rebellion. With these acts, Boston Harbor was closed, and all commercial activity was halted. Massachusetts's autonomous government was dissolved, and British soldiers were forcefully quartered in colonists' homes. However, Britain's goal backfired. These harsh and unjust laws united the colonists as never before. Other colonies like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York sent aid to Boston, and this spirit of resistance spread across all of America. This set the stage for the First Continental Congress and paved the way to the Revolution. The Boston Tea Party was about more than just tea being dumped into the harbor. It was a symbol of rebellion, an expression of the search for freedom, representation, and justice. It was proof of how a single tax and the actions of a handful of determined men could ignite a revolution. So next time you sip your tea, remember that once, in the freezing winter of Boston, tea wasn't just a drink. It was a declaration of freedom. To keep exploring the mysterious and untold stories of history, don't forget to subscribe to the Histic channel. Share your thoughts on the Boston Tea Party in the comments below.